The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the tick of the old wall clock above the judge's bench echo like a drumbeat of fate. Rain tapped gently against the tall arched windows, and every seat was filled with people who had no idea what they were about to witness. The bailiff called her name, and all eyes turned to the back as a small black girl, no older than 10, rose from the bench beside her aunt and slowly walked to the witness stand. Her steps were careful. Her shoes were too big. Her face was calm but carried the weight of something heavier than her years should have allowed. Her name was Amara James, and this was the day she would speak for her father. A man sat at the defense table, his hands cuffed, his head low. He wore a beige jumpsuit and a face full of scars, some visible, some buried deep. That was Amara's father, Elijah James. Once a respected community mechanic, now accused of something that could steal away the rest of his life. They said he stole from the company he worked for. They said he burned down the garage. They said he tried to destroy the evidence. But Amara knew a different man, and she held something in her hand that no one else had seen yet. A folded letter, written in blue pen on the back of a receipt. A letter from her dad. A letter she wasn't supposed to have. The judge peered down over his glasses, voice gruff. He asked Amara if she knew what it meant to tell the truth. She nodded. He asked if she understood how serious this was. She nodded again. But it wasn't her silence that held the courtroom in its grip. It was her eyes, big and brown and unblinking. They weren't just filled with fear. They were filled with purpose. Amara sat down and pulled the microphone closer. Her fingers trembled only once. Then she began to speak. The first words from her lips didn't sound like a child's. They sounded like something carved from years of watching too much happen too soon. "My name is Amara James," she said, "and I'm here because my daddy didn't do what they said he did. He's not a criminal. He's not a liar. He's the one who taught me to tell the truth, even when it hurts." People leaned forward. The prosecutor shuffled his notes, suddenly uncertain. Elijah's public defender sat frozen, eyes wide. Outside, thunder rumbled. Inside, the storm had already begun. Amara told them about the night everything changed. The night she woke up to sirens. The night she saw her father on the porch with his hands raised as cops shouted. She told them how he looked at her with eyes full of fear, but not for himself. For her. She told them how he told her to go back, inside, and be brave. Brave like the lion in the stories, he had whispered. That lion had teeth. And today, so did she. She talked about how her father never missed a shift, even when his back hurt so bad he had to lie on the floor for an hour before going to work. She described how he kept a tiny notebook where he wrote down every part replaced, every customer complaint, every late delivery, because, he once said, truth leaves a trail, even if people try to hide it. Then she unfolded the letter. It was old and creased, but her hands held it steady. "He gave this to me a week before he got arrested," she said. "He told me to keep it until I thought the world needed to hear it. I think that's now." The judge glanced at the prosecutor, who stood and objected. The judge overruled. "Let her speak," he said. The courtroom held its breath. The letter wasn't long, just a father's words to his daughter. But within it were lines that cracked something open in the hearts of everyone listening. If they ever try to say, "I'm a bad man, remember what I taught you. Truth is louder than money, louder than lies. It just takes longer to be heard. I didn't take what they said I did. I found out who did. But they made me the scapegoat because I'm easy to throw away. Just a black mechanic. Just a man who works with his hands and not with a suit. But you've got fire in your voice, baby. One day, if it comes to it, use that fire." Amara folded the letter again and looked up. "I'm using it now," she said. One juror wiped his eyes. Another blinked fast and looked down. The judge sat straighter. The prosecutor didn't move. For a moment, it felt like the world stopped. And then she said the sentence that would change everything. "There's a video on my dad's old phone," she said. "It shows who really burned the garage, and I know where it is." Gasps rippled across the room. The defense lawyer shot up like he'd been struck by lightning. The judge leaned in. "Where is it, Miss James?" Amara looked directly at the prosecutor. "In his office. He took my dad's phone and never logged it into evidence." The courtroom erupted. The moment those words left Amara's lips, the courtroom was thrown into a storm louder than the one pounding outside. Voices clashed like thunder. Reporters rushed from their seats. The judge slammed his gavel so hard the echo cracked against the wooden walls. "Order!" he barked. "There will be order in this court." But order had already slipped through, the cracks replaced by a truth too heavy to ignore. The prosecutor stood frozen, his face paling by the second. Beads of sweat rolled down his temple as whispers of corruption slithered through the courtroom like smoke. The defense attorney turned sharply, voice suddenly full of fire. "Your Honor, I request an immediate recess. We demand access to the evidence this child just revealed." The judge nodded once, jaw tight. "Bailiff, escort the child to a private chamber, and someone get the chief of records in here, now." As Amara was gently led out, she looked back only once. Her eyes met her father's, and in that single glance, something passed between them. Not words, not gestures, just truth. The kind that couldn't be buried under lies or locked behind cold metal bars. In the private chamber, Amara sat with the court-appointed child advocate, her tiny legs swinging from the chair. She explained how, days before his arrest, her father had taken her on a long walk. They talked about the stars, about lions and bravery. And then he told her a story, one that wasn't in any book. He said there were men who wore suits but didn't earn them, men who stole behind closed doors and smiled for cameras. He said one of those men was the real arsonist, a supervisor named Brett Haynes. Elijah had caught him stealing funds, and when he tried to report it, the company turned on him. He said Brett threatened him, told him if he didn't stay quiet, they'd make him disappear. And then the garage burned. Elijah never fought back. He knew the system. A black man in a working-class neighborhood didn't get the benefit of the doubt. So he stayed silent, except to his daughter. Back in the courtroom, chaos turned to urgency. A court order was signed, the prosecutor's office was searched, and in the back of a locked drawer was Elijah's phone, wiped, but not completely. The forensic team recovered a single video file, encrypted but intact. It was time-stamped the night of the fire. Everyone returned to the courtroom. The judge's face was carved from stone. Amara was back on the bench, her hands in her lap. Elijah still sat in chains, but his eyes were no longer low. He stared straight ahead. The video was played. It showed Brett Haynes inside the garage, stacking oily rags near a gas line. His face was clear. He was laughing. He didn't know the phone, tucked behind a toolbox, was recording. The fire flickered into view. Then Brett walked out, phone in hand, Elijah's phone. The same phone he would later turn in as found evidence. The room was silent except for the audio. And then the screen went black. No one said a word for nearly a full minute. The judge broke the silence. "All charges against Elijah James are dismissed, effective immediately." Then he looked at the prosecutor. "You will remain for a separate inquiry." The prosecutor sat like a statue, his career crumbling by the second. As the cuffs were removed from Elijah's wrists, Amara ran to him. They embraced in the middle of the courtroom, father and daughter, wrapped in each other as the gallery erupted into applause. Some were crying, others just stared, stunned by what had unfolded. A little black girl had walked into the lion's den and roared louder than anyone had expected. Reporters hounded them outside. Flashbulbs lit up the rainy sidewalk. But Amara didn't speak. Not now. Not yet. She simply held her father's hand and walked through the chaos like royalty. Elijah's name would be cleared. The real criminals would face justice. But today wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, and it had been told. By the next morning, the video had gone viral across every social media platform. It aired on national news outlets and even overseas. Headlines lit up in bold fonts. Black girl brings down corrupt system with a single testimony. 11-year-old hero saves her father. Little girl exposes corporate corruption in open court. But beneath the sensationalism was something quieter, something deeper. People weren't just shocked. They were moved. They felt something they hadn't felt in years. Hope. In a small hotel room paid for by a local civil rights organization, Elijah and Amara sat together, watching the world react to their truth. He barely spoke. Tears streamed down his face. Not because of fame, not because of headlines, but because his daughter had saved his life. He whispered to her in a trembling voice that he would never let her down again. She just smiled and leaned into him. "I know," she said. "You never did." What no one knew yet was that the video was only part of a larger web, a deep and rotting conspiracy threaded through corporate boardrooms and government offices. The same men who tried to silence Elijah had done this before, to others, to entire communities. But now they were exposed. Civil rights lawyers stepped forward. One by one, whistleblowers came out of the shadows. A security guard from the same company admitted he'd seen the fire being set. A former accountant provided forged documents proving company-wide financial manipulation. And within days, a federal investigation began. Amara's testimony triggered something bigger than she ever imagined. Politicians started citing her words. A school in her city renamed its library in her honor. Parents pointed to her as a role model. But for Amara, none of that mattered. What mattered was that her dad was home. That justice, even if late, had finally arrived. Back in courtrooms across the state, other black fathers fighting wrongful charges began invoking the Amara Clause, a symbolic shift, a reminder that even a child could challenge the powerful and win. Media analysts couldn't explain it, but preachers and poets did. They said truth carried its own thunder, and Amara had become lightning. On a rainy afternoon 2 weeks later, Elijah took Amara to the courthouse steps, the same place, where everything had begun. She stood beside him, wearing a yellow jacket and holding a single white flower. A crowd gathered. Elijah didn't prepare a speech. He didn't need to. He simply said this: "My daughter believed in me when no one else did. She believed in the truth, and she made the world listen. If one little black girl can change all, imagine what we can all do if we stand together." The crowd erupted in cheers. Amara didn't flinch. She wasn't overwhelmed. She didn't look away. She looked directly into the cameras and smiled softly. Not because she was proud, but because the world had finally heard her, and they would never forget it. Months passed, but the echo of that courtroom never faded. Elijah began to rebuild his life. It wasn't easy. The scars of injustice don't fade overnight. But he woke up every morning with a purpose. With Amara beside him, the world didn't seem so dark anymore. He opened a small community legal aid center with the help of pro bono attorneys. His mission was clear. No one should suffer what he did, especially not because of the color of their skin. Families who once felt powerless started walking through those doors, and they walked out stronger. Amara went back to school, but everything had changed. Her teachers treated her with a new kind of respect. Not the polite kind, the real kind. The kind earned by fire. Her classmates whispered when she passed, but never with mockery. Only awe. She joined the debate team. At her first tournament, the final round topic was Justice in America. The judges barely blinked as she stood there calm and steady and carved truth into the silence with every word. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her presence did all the shouting. At home, her mother watched her from the edge of every doorway, silently proud, quietly humbled. A family once broken now felt like a fortress, forged not by perfection, but by pain endured together. One evening, Amara sat by her window sketching the courthouse from memory. Her father walked in quietly, sat beside her. "You never told me," he said. "Where did you get the strength that day?" She paused for a long time, then looked up. "I wasn't strong," she said. "I was scared. But I couldn't let them break the truth. Not when it was standing right there in that courtroom, wearing your face." Elijah didn't say anything. He couldn't. He just pulled her close. For once, the man who had always been her protector realized she had become his. Years later, Amara's name appeared on the front page again. This time as the youngest law graduate in her university's history, her cap read in bold letters, "For Dad." The photo went viral. Not because she had made headlines again, but because behind her stood Elijah, older, grayer, smiling, and holding a sign that said, "She was always my lawyer." The courtroom that once echoed with injustice now echoed with legacy. A black girl who took the stand not for fame, not for applause, but for her father, for truth, for every voiceless soul who thought no one would ever listen, and the world would never forget her name.